So the slate is up.
Margaret.
Good there, everyone? Yeah. Okay, Ace Frehley, take one. Wanted to start by asking you, Ace, going back to when you guys started with Kiss.
Long time ago.
Long time ago. I want to get a sense, it seemed in the 70s that bands like Kiss, bands like Aerosmith, bands like Ted Nugent kind of brought the fun back into the music after the 60s, which was a pretty serious, intense time. Can you tell me about that time and what you think Kiss kind of brought into music then?
Well, we brought theater, we brought special effects, we brought glamour to an extent. When we were putting our act together in New York, the New York Dolls were even bigger than Kiss from the outset, and obviously that whole thing turned around. We were trying new things that nobody else has done. Me with all my special effects. Slowly over the years, with the smoking guitar, the light guitar, the rocket guitar. It was all new, and it was exciting.
Yeah. And why was it important to you to do something that had this kind of theatrical and kind of really energetic vibe to it? Why did you want to do something like that?
Some of my biggest influences, like, Pete Townsend, going to see The Who played a Murray the K show, cutting school, and sneaking into the show and seeing, The Who for the first time, and he's smashing up the guitars and smoke bombs and Keith Moon wrecking the drums. I mean, it was really exciting because not only were they a great band musically, but, they gave you something visually on top of it,
right,
which a lot of groups in the past weren't doing.
Right.
So it was new and exciting, and it was something I wanted to be involved with. After seeing The Who and Hendrix, I wanted to be in a theatrical rock group.
Yeah.
And, Kiss was the perfect vehicle for me.
Interestingly, as I mentioned, bands like yourselves and Aerosmith and Nugent, it's like the politics had left music, it seemed. There's a lot of political music in the 60s, and it seemed in the 70s that kind of... Why do you think that politics just disappeared from music at that time?
I don't know. I think people might have got tired of it, and I think sometimes politics, intertwined with music, sometimes the music gets lost because the message is more important sometimes than the music.
Right.
I never liked to mix politics and music. I just thought, for me it never worked. To me, the most important thing is the music, and the show is always secondary.
Right.
And that was one of the things that eventually I realized what was going on with Kiss, that sometimes they'd write about the show more than the music.
Yeah.
And, then I started becoming disenchanted,
Yeah.
in the late 70s, or actually the early 80s. And,
Sure.
eventually, helped push my departure out.
And speaking of the music, I mean, how did you see yourselves? Would you see yourselves as a rock band? Did you see yourselves as a hard rock band, a heavy metal band? How were you describing it at that time?
I always hated labels.
Yeah.
Kiss isn't a heavy metal band, but, we've done some really heavy songs that would definitely fall into that category.
Mm-hmm.
We've done some pop songs. We've done some straight ahead rock and roll. We were probably in our own fucking category.
Yeah.
And like I said, labels always sometimes are misleading. You label somebody a certain way. Then we come out with a song like Beth,
Yeah.
and, that's not heavy metal.
Yeah.
And I Was Made for Loving You was a huge departure, and it was something I wasn't really happy about either, because it was started to get into the disco vein, and that pissed off a lot of fans. But
Peter felt the same way when I talked to him. Not surprisingly, I guess.
me and Peter really weren't a big fan of that song, and I hated playing it because I played the same thing through the whole goddamn song, except for the solo. I'm going tucka 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 tucka, and my wrist felt like it was going to fall off.
Yeah.
But thank God those are memories now.
I mean, it's interesting you mentioned the musical element of Kiss. I mean, given that the show and the spectacle of it became such a focus, at least with the media, was it a struggle for you in that sense that you wanted the music to be as important?
Well, I mean, I thought the music was more important than the show. The show was just, something for your eyes. Well, I found frustrating when you'd read reviews about people would say, "Oh, the show was amazing," and then at the end they go, "And the music was good too." Okay, well, I'm a musician first, so I didn't like those reviews. But I guess we set ourselves up for stuff like that, with the outlandish costumes and theatrics. So, you know,
Yeah.
it's all water under the bridge now, but, you know, it was a lot of fun, you know, until it became not fun.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned Beth, and I talked to Peter about that song, and I asked him about why he thought that that song was such a huge song.
Well, it was a great song.
Yeah.
You know, produced, you know, Bob Ezrin did a wonderful job rewriting it and producing it, and you know, it captured the imagination of a lot of people. You know, people that normally wouldn't buy a Kiss record, and because of that song, that album it was on, which was what, Destroyer, sold twice as many copies because of that one song.
Yeah.
We got exposed to people that normally wouldn't, you know, take a look at Kiss. So it broadened our audience.
Yeah.
You know, as far as I Was Made for Loving You, you know, I didn't want to be liked by disco people, but you know, it just somehow happened, and I just went along with it because as usual, I was outvoted. You know.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, why? Disco is huge, obviously. I mean, was that part of the reason for doing that song? It was such a pull towards that whole sound at that time?
I'm not saying I'm against disco music. You know, I used to go to Studio 54 and dance to disco, you know, with the Bionic Woman. But it has its place. You know, Kiss is Kiss, disco is disco, and never the twain should meet. So that was the problem I had with the song.
Yeah.
You know, it was a direction. I didn't want to pull the band in that direction.
Right.
But somehow it happened, and it was a big hit. But, you know, you can also do, you know, Mary Had a Little Lamb, and it'll be a big hit. I don't know. But do you want to be remembered for it is a big question.
Well, if you did a disco version of Mary Had a Little Lamb, that would probably be a big hit.
I'd rather do a heavy metal version, to be honest with you.
Back to Beth, I mean, as you know, I mean, the 70s, radio was starting to become pretty important for rock bands.
Radio was huge back then.
Yeah.
You know, nothing like it is today.
Yeah. Can you tell me about how important radio was? And I guess Beth was a song that kind of fit into the radio format.
Yeah. I mean, well, there was a lot more radio stations back then, and radio definitely could make or break a record and a band. And, you know, Beth was a big shot in the arm for us. And, you know, like I said, it gave us exposure to people that normally wouldn't even know who Kiss was. And, you know, back then radio was huge. And now it's not the same. And it's, you know, and now you got everything's owned by, you know, huge corporations, and you got satellite, and radio was king back then. Radio and records. You know, I remember records, real records that you put on a turntable. You know, you talk to kids today, they don't even know what the hell you're talking about.
I remember records too. I got a few of those.
Yeah.
You mentioned Bob Ezrin, and I'm going to be talking with Bob in about a week about his work with you guys and with Alice, of course, as well. Can you tell me a bit more about what Bob brought to the band, his producing?
Well, Bob brought a cohesiveness and a sound that, you know, we didn't have before we hooked up with Bob. You know, and you know, Bob classically trained, you know, and had made a lot of hit records prior to working with us. So, you know, he had a proven formula, and you know, we had to kind of fit into his formula, and you know, I think it worked on a lot of the songs. And you know, I thought Destroyer was a great record. You know. I mean, Bob's the one that came up with the solo for Detroit Rock City. I didn't write that. You know, Bob came up with the melody.
Right.
And, you know, he had some great ideas, and, you know, we were able to execute them pretty much the way he wanted us to. And, you know, it made for a good marriage at that point in time. You know, and I think it showed a different side musically of where we were prior to that point.
Did you guys ever feel any pressure to write songs that would fit that radio format at that time? Did you, either from record labels or just within the band itself, did you feel a sense of pressure? It's like, oh, radio is huge, this is going to be a huge vehicle for us?
Look, every record label in those days wanted their band to have a top 10 hit single. You know, that you know, that's no mystery. You know, but a lot of groups, you know, it was hard to come up with something that was, you know, going to fit that mold. We were lucky enough to, you know, find it a few times, you know, with Rock and Roll Night and Beth, I Was Made for Loving You, a couple of others, and, you know, we were lucky. We had the show and the musicianship and the image to back it up. most people in those days said, you got to see Kiss to believe Kiss. And once you come to a Kiss concert in those days, you usually walked out a fan.
Yeah.
So it was something. It was something, all right.
I'm glad you mentioned the live thing because I wanted to ask you about Kiss Alive. Because not only you guys, but many of the other bands of the 70s, at least at that time, live records and double live records became sort of another tool in the box of hard rock bands. Why do you think Kiss Alive was such a big record for you guys?
It was the right record at the right time with the right packaging. Mm-hmm. And it kind of led the way for other groups after us to actually follow that same mold. Mm-hmm. You had Cheap Trick with Live at the Budokan. You had, Frampton's Comes Alive, all double LPs and all hugely successful. So, it was the right record at the right time, and it gave the band a shot in the arm because prior to that, we weren't a million-selling album group.
Right.
Our first 3 albums did okay.
Sure.
But, if Alive would have failed, I don't know what would have happened.
Right.
But history is history.
And do you think, was the live record an opportunity for fans to, bring the live experience home?
Well, that was all part of it, too. Since Kiss was known for such a live band and the performance and the whole 9 yards, it was kind of like a souvenir. And that's what even made it more special.
So the packaging was very important, too.
Very much
so. It wasn't just the music. It was like a whole kind of experience, it seems.
The whole experience, yeah.
I guess it kind of gave you guys a bit of a break, too. You didn't have to put out another... back at that time, bands were kind of expected to put out studio albums every year.
Yeah, I was just talking to my manager, David Fry, and I couldn't believe that in 18 months we put out 4 albums.
Yeah.
I mean, that's unheard of today.
Yeah.
We needed to do it because the record company, needed to continue going, and we needed the money, and the record company needed the sales. And like I said, luckily, Alive took off like a bat out of hell, and kept going for years and years.
The lightning bolt logo. Why was it important to have that with Kiss? Do you think?
There's no rhyme or reason. I really believe that Kiss was fate. The 4 of us, it was fate that we come together. I designed the logo. Everybody came up with their own makeup pretty much. From the very outset of the band, it was the 4 of us brainstorming or going off on their own and coming up with ideas and then bringing it back to the band. And we were just like at the right place at the right time with the right people behind us. I mean, Bill O'Corn was a wonderful manager. I know him and Neil Bogart really almost went bankrupt. Like I said, up until the point where Alive really took off, they both had hocked almost everything, to keep us on the road and to keep us going because they believed in us.
What was your perspective on, all the aspects of Kiss that were merchandise? When you guys had pinball machines, you had dolls, you had lunchboxes.
In the beginning, it wasn't bad, I mean, it's very cool to have a pinball machine, but, Gene got completely out of control because of the over-merchandising that happened with Kiss. Little kids started showing up at the show with Kiss dolls, the lunchboxes, and all that stuff. And the audience started to change. And I remember very clearly before a show having a conversation, with management and stuff, saying, hey, Ace, you can't go out there and say fuck because there's little kids in the audience, so you got to watch the cursing, and, that kind of made me cringe because, you want to go out there and be able to be yourself. Mm-hmm. And, express yourself the way you feel like doing it. And, if you got to worry because, there's a 5-year-old kid in front of you, it kind of, puts a little damper on the party. And, that was another thing that made me realize, this maybe wasn't exactly what I wanted anymore.
Right. It's interesting, because I guess it changes your rock and roll music when you've got 5-year-olds in the audience.
I'm a serious guitar player. I didn't want to have to, change the way I acted, I'm trying to fuck my guitar, and I'm starting to feel weird because there's young kids in the audience, and maybe I can't, fuck it like I used to, a few years ago. So
I mean, the interesting thing about you guys, too, is you talked about, you know, gradually there were 5-year-old kids coming to the show, but
Yeah.
there was a point at which parents didn't want their 5-year-olds anywhere near you guys, in the sense that it was the whole Knights in Satan's service, and this idea that you guys were an actual threat.
Well, I remember playing the Bible Belt. Forget about 5-year-olds. They didn't want their teenagers at our show, and they'd be burning our albums outside in a bonfire. That only made people want to come see. The kids only wanted to come see us more when they saw that on the news. So it really backfired. That whole Knights in Satan service was all concocted by I don't know who, but you got 2 Jewish guys, a Catholic guy, and a Lutheran. You know, who all grew up in America and just decided to have a theatrical rock group, and over somebody says, we're devil worshippers,
Yeah.
Completely absurd, preposterous. Anybody who comes up with something new, there's always going to be the people that are scared of it. People are scared of change. People are scared of, stuff they don't understand.
Yeah.
And, obviously that happened with us too, but it happens with everybody who breaks new ground. Like I said, we wanted to take theatrical rock to the next level, I mean, The Who broke ground. Alice Cooper obviously broke a lot more ground. Jimi Hendrix broke ground, and we took it to the next level. And I guess we did shock a lot of people. I mean, I remember there was doing television shows and stuff. I remember doing the Mike Douglas show, and they weren't ready for us. Yeah. They had no idea what they were in store for. They didn't know bombs were going to go off, and people are jumping back. It was a lot of fun. I mean, we achieved what we wanted to achieve. The problem was, by the end of the 70s, everybody was kind of getting comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, the direction of the band started to shift because of all the merchandising and stuff. And I started becoming uncomfortable with it. And other people wanted to ride it.
Yeah.
The money was going in the bank. Everybody said, well, we got this formula now, let's keep doing it.
The music is very important to you. That's clear.
Absolutely.
That you want to always be creating music that is exciting for you as a player.
Well, it was always about the music for me.
Yeah.
The show was always secondary.
Yeah.
I loved the show.
Yeah.
And obviously, like I said, I created all these special effects. And I love all that stuff. But, that can't be the most important thing. It's really got to be about the music, and that's just icing on the cake.
Cool. If you don't mind, I'd just like to close with a few questions about some of your earlier influences.
Sure.
You mentioned The Who.
Yeah.
And seeing The Who and being captivated by what they were doing. What were they bringing to rock music that was totally brand new at that time?
Well, they were really the first theatrical rock group I ever saw.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready for The Who. I didn't know Pete Townsend was going to, do the windmills and smash his guitar at the end and, smash it into the amplifier and smoke bombs were going off. I was like blown away. Because, they were a great rock group. And on top of that, they gave you something to see, visually.
Yeah.
That made it even more exciting.
Yeah.
So I became an instant Who fan. I cut school, went down to the Murder Case show. The headliner was Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels.
Yeah.
And besides The Who on the bill, it was the Cream. And that was their first tour. And they were amazing. They were musically just as amazing, visually great, but, not quite as exciting as The Who because they took it to the next level. And in my mind, I always said to myself, if I can be in a great rock group and also, do great theatrics, you can't lose.
Yeah.
Pete followed his dream and, took The Who with him. I would have liked Kiss to be a little less merchandised and focus more on the music and,
Right.
I wanted to stay heavy. I never wanted to, deviate from that main foundation.
What's that attraction to playing heavy music?
Well, I can remember the very first time I played electric guitar, and it was in my friend's house. Up until that point, I'd only been playing acoustic guitars and plugged it in and turned up the amp, and I hit an E chord, and I was in love,
Yeah.
The beauty of heavy music is you can feel it, You stand in front of a Marshall stack, and you play a riff. That's the magnetism. That's what draws people to it, You can feel the music as well as hear it.
Great.